Welcome to Discovery Watch with John Kaiser.
I'm Jim Goddard. John, welcome back to the show.
Jim, pleasure to be back.
John, last week you were in the Yukon touring various projects, one of which was the RAW project of ATAC Resources, which you introduced to Discovery Watch back in January. What's happening at the new Bobcat zone?
Well, the Bobcat zone was uncovered last year. Last year, of course, was a terrible year for ATAC because Barrick, after spending $10 million within 2 years on the Orion segment of the Rakla Belt, where they were looking for Carlin type of sediment-hosted gold systems, suddenly pulled the plug and walked away, and the stock tanked. And they've spent over $60 million on this eastern part of this 185-kilometer belt, most of it in the Osiris area, where the Conrad zone, where they have, outlined ounces, but they're refractory. It's a remote location, and the ounces aren't really high enough yet to develop. But while they were checking out some of the soil samples, sparse soil samples have been picked up on the RAW project, which is at the western end, where all things got all kicked off in 2009 when they discovered the Tiger Zone. They discovered a high-grade copper gold skarn float in the vicinity of a kill zone, which is, there's sulfides close to the surface, and plants vegetation isn't really growing there. So whenever you see these as an explorer, you check out and see what sort of metallic goodies are destroying the vegetation. Anyways, during the trip, we got a pretty good explanation from Julia Lane, the VP of Exploration, who has lived and breathed this project for the past decade. And they now understand that there is a Pluton, the Rakla Pluton, which is the primary engine. And most of the focus in the earlier days has been to the west of this intrusion, and it's kind of a limestone stratigraphy, and the carbonate replacement model that Peter McGaw has developed. The Tiger Zone fits into that, and then you move farther away and you get lower temperature and you get a different mineral suite, and they've got all these feline named targets that they focused all this effort at. But this was to the southeast of this intrusion, and now they're saying, wow, this type of mineralization is much closer to the assumed heat engine. And this story is similar to what we were seeing with Sun Metals and its Stardust project, where last year the 421 hole intersected much higher grade mineralization of the sort of skarn type that's much closer to the source. And Sun Metals yesterday put out a news release which we thought would include assays, but merely included description that they've got a whole bunch of holes drilled and they are continuing on, and thus the market kind of reacted with disappointment, because we're hoping to see a body start taking shape. If you read between the lines, you will see that is happening. But at Bobcat, they have started the first drill hole in this area. And this play is starting to shape up as very exciting. They now have a good understanding of the general geology, what's driving the system. And they did a soil sampling survey, which also revealed a interesting anomaly about a couple kilometers to the east of the Bobcat area. There's a gold anomaly, this physically, spatially distinct to the north of a very prominent copper anomaly. And so they're saying, wow, there's a lot going on in this area. So ATAC, I think, amongst the companies there, is the one that showed particularly well. They are also hoping that this 65-kilometer tote road that they would like to build all the way to the Tiger project gets formal approval next March. It has conditional approval, but it's been dragging along because, various issues. The First Nations have to decide, do they want this area opened up for a lot more people, including themselves, to roam around and hunt and do stuff, or do they want to restrict it? So all of that's being sorted out. And if this road gets built into this area, it will open up a relatively underexplored area. Even though ATAC has poured almost $100 million into this area in the past decade. They have barely scratched the surface. But the Tiger Zone itself, it's not really large enough by itself. But the Bobcat, the apparent footprint of the Bobcat system, if they demonstrate that the high-grade float that they have there at surface comes from a sizable skarn at depth, and if this new soil sampling survey suggests that this has quite significant lateral extent, this could be a very important discovery to emerge this summer and make ATAC one of our Discovery Watch winners for the year.
We'll have more with John Kaiser right after this.
Cypress Development Corp is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Grand Portage Resources' Herbert Gold Project in southeast Alaska highlights increased gold resource, indicated and inferred, of 860,000 ounces, in excess of 10 grams per ton gold. Expansion drilling is planned on the Herbert Gold property for the summer of 2019. Grand Portage Resources trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTCQB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with John Kaiser. John, during your Yukon tour last week, you also visited the Brewery Creek project of Golden Predator. Any insights on how the company plans to proceed next?
Well, if you go back a couple of weeks ago, like in late June, it was not clear at all what Golden Predator was going to be doing, other than doing more bulk sampling of the 3 ACES project, where they have very high-grade gold pods at surface. They have not been able to stitch it together to produce a resource, and it's unclear that they ever will. The tour involving Golden Predator had 2 parts. On the Saturday, we went up to Watson Lake, where they have an office, and also where they were somehow managed to get approval for a bulk sampling plant within a large compound operated by Kerry Peters, who has a soil remediation business and seems to operate a giant junkyard for discarded equipment from which you can pillage parts to make other equipment work, and also where he acquires stuff and rents it out to others. So in the middle of this was this spiffy-looking plant that Golden Predator has built. We got to watch a gold pour. And this was quite interesting. We couldn't hear anything because we were all forced to wear earplugs because of the background noise from the from the processing plant. It only does about 55 tons per day. And anyways, with the gold pour, they poured the gold. That was all great. We saw the videotaping of it, and then everybody just stood around and looked at other stuff. And all of a sudden, the foreman, says something to the to his young assistant, and this was quite funny. The videographer apparently caught this on camera, and hopefully it doesn't end up on the cutting floor. But this young guy goes away and comes back with these 6-inch tongs, and the much older foreman starts to gesticulate, stretching his arms way out like a yard wide, and sending him back. And next thing you know, the guy comes back with a very large set of tongs. And this was just classic because this brick was still quite hot, and they needed to handle it and bash off all the black crud, the slag that was with it. Anyways, we got to see stuff like that. Afterwards, we went to the Watson Lake office, where the Kaska First Nations had prepared a meal for us, which was really good. And what was a real delight was 3 drummer singers performed a welcome prayer for us, of which I managed to have some sort of fuzzy recording that I'm going to try and get online. But the next day was all about going to the Brewery Creek project, for which they on July 2nd got a surprise news that the original license was still intact. And the credit for all of this does not go to Bill Sheriff, but goes to his wife, Janet Lee Sheriff, who is the CEO of the company. She's a Yukon veteran of over 30 years. When after that decision in 2013 where they said, no, this is a closed mine. If you want to reopen it, you need to do it from scratch with a pretty rigorous sort of 3-year permitting process if all goes well, rather than the sort of 1.5-year process that would have happened if the existing licenses remained intact. She went in and uncovered the paper trail, was able to demonstrate to the government that, in fact, the mine was never properly closed down, so that these rules that you applied should not have been applied. So they ended up reversing that decision, and the company can proceed. But that alone would not have done the trick. Janet's specialty is working with First Nations. And in the Yukon, the First Nations waver between really embracing mining and being uncertain about it. They're not particularly happy about the placer mining that goes on, and frankly, anybody who's like flying over the Yukon and looks at the mess that they made of all these tributaries to the Klondike River would have to agree that, yeah, placer mining, why do they have such rigorous standards for bedrock mining, and these dredgers can sit there and continue to mess up the environment as though rules haven't changed in the past 100 years. And it was interesting. On the Wednesday we had on Tuesday we had the conference where we didn't go on any tours and just talk to companies, and Chief Joseph gave the opening talk, and one of the Yukon people who's like tuned into all the politics pointed out that she specifically mentioned that or referred to quartz miners when she talked about the good evolving relationship between First Nations and the mining community. And that quartz miner was a specific reference to the placer miners who with whom the First Nations are not particularly happy. And the reason she uses the word quartz is because quartz claims are what they call the bedrock claims in the Yukon, and placer claims are a different category. And they have this strange practice of requiring placer claims to have 6 by 6-inch posts. And in order to get a 6 by 6-inch post, you need to chop down a tree that is at least 8.5 inches diameter. And guess what there is not a lot of in the Yukon? Well, they all get all their posts from British Columbia. And one of the sort of things we talked about there was why has Yukon not lurched into the 21st century and created a map staking system like all the other groups, especially since all the other provinces have already worked their way through all the problems that they can encounter, and the Yukon could do a perfect job setting up a new map staking system. And the Premier Sandy Silver explained, well, this would impact some of the local jobs. But I think this is something the Yukon needs to think about, because right now it's a monopoly of a small group of prospectors with the teams to go out there and stake, and they prefer to stake in winter when they can bomb around in snowmobiles and put their smaller posts in. If you have map staking, if a company suddenly hits something, for example, let's say Chuck Fipke with his Cantex's project up there, the Broken Hill project, farther north than anybody has ever really bothered to look for anything, suddenly finds that he doesn't just have this narrow, high-grade zinc, lead, silver system, but a true Broken Hill or Cannington scale type system, and he should be able to go out there and map stake enough to cover the whole area, but instead he'll have to do it by doing old-fashioned post staking. So the Yukon needs to reconsider that map staking, because if you are able to use geological thinking and are not necessarily boots on the ground type person, you still should be able to stake claims and then market it to juniors or bigger companies to get some work done. So they're actually hindering exploration efforts in the Yukon by keeping it old-fashioned post-staking. And in this way, they are as backwards as Nevada, which has the additional backwardsness of these BLM fees that are due at the end of each year with no actual assessment work to be filed, whereas in the Yukon, assessment work does have to be filed so that if you do let your claims lapse, somebody will be able to benefit from what you did manage to accomplish. Anyways, to return to Brewery Creek, since they took on that project in 2009 from Alexco, they've spent about $35 million, but not much in the past few years, and they published a PEA in 2014, and that PEA has a US dollar capex of about $85 million, which is a lot more than the net present value of the project at $1,250 gold. It'd be interesting to see what it is at $1,425 where gold is today, but their plan is to work on a revised PEA where they scale it back to have only a capex of $35 million, and part of the plan involves reactivating an old heap which where the ore was piled up, but it was never fully leached, and there is still grade in there. They have drilled it off. They know that it's there. So there's some easy upfront cash flow that they can get. As for exploration, they are now have launched a drill program to stitch together a number of the zones that they've outlined where the pits have to be separate. They're doing now drilling in between to see if the mineralization connects. They also want a better handle on the cutoff grade so that if we do see gold going up to, like, say, $1,800 an ounce, they can lower the cutoff grade and make the pits bigger rather than having a whole bunch of these puddles strung along like pearls on a string. So all of this, of course, has been kicked off by a few days after that announcement from the Yukon on the license, and this was after we last talked about Golden Predator. They managed to raise nearly $9 million at roughly 45 cents flow-through charity, and this was led by Eric Sprott, who has taken a fresh interest, and he's now suddenly active putting money into quite a few number of deals. So the company has gone from being in the financial doghouse to being cashed up. It's continuing to do work on the three aces, but the focus is clearly going to the Brewery Creek. And, of course, the deeper ore, the sulfides, they are refractory, which seems to be the case in a lot of parts of the Yukon, where as soon as you transition from oxide, you get into refractory sulfides. One of the metallurgical things they're going to do this year is explore something that the original operators, Loki Gold, did. They had explored biox treatment to see if that can enhance the leachability of this ore. But nothing was ever done because they ended up focusing on just making the oxide leach properly. And they'll be doing some work on that to see if there is some low-cost way of making that the sulfides, the deeper sulfides, treatable, because there is a substantial deeper resource in this system that has never been really explored. Most of the drilling is shallow, because what's the point of exploring for this lower grade sulfide stuff unless you have some way of treating it? So yeah, Golden Predator and its Brewery Creek project are now back on the front burner, and everything is going great thanks to Janet Lee Sheriff's efforts in cultivating the relationships with the First Nations and getting them on side as partners in developing bedrock mines in the Yukon.
We'll have more with John Kaiser right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
I'm Douglas Mason, CEO of Naturally Splendid, symbol NSP on the TSX Venture Exchange. Naturally Splendid is a biotechnology and consumer products company focused on the global cannabis and health markets. Naturally Splendid is expanding distribution in this rapidly growing market with products currently in Canada, the USA, South Korea, Germany, and Australia. To view our comprehensive company presentation and for more information, please visit our website at naturallysplendid.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with John Kaiser, John, why is Scandium International trading up today?
Scandium International is up because shareholders are probably celebrating the end of an ordeal that began on the first trading day of the year when the company announced that the mining lease it got for the Nyngan project in New South Wales in 2017 was being canceled because one of the parcel owners had filed an objection during the initial permitting process that the New South Wales department had managed to never receive, and this was brought to their attention back in May of 2017, but they couldn't find any evidence of it, so they just sort of told Owen Carter to go fly a kite. And then a year later, in around September, October of 2018, somebody found an envelope in some file that had nothing to do with Nyngan, brought it to the attention of the bosses, and before they knew it, they said, "Oh, here's Owen Carter's objection letter, and yes, we should have dealt with it, and what are we going to do now about this?" And the only way they can deal with this objection letter is to cancel the mining lease that covers both the land that Scandium International owns outright and that which belongs to the farmer, and then reprocess it. And then they ran into this crazy problem of it's in the electronic register, and it seems to be like a one-way thing. If something gets approved and gets posted in there, it has to stay there forever. You can't reverse it. And so they've had the IT department scratching their heads. How on earth do we properly cancel this thing so we can deal with this? And meanwhile, the company realized this is not going anywhere. Owen Carter went on to sue the planning department, not quite sure for what, but he was pretty annoyed that he had been dissed by them and ignored. And so the company filed for a new mining lease application on the ground that they had already held. The company thought that it was going to get that lease in June, but all this other stuff has dragged on, and today they finally announced that they have a new mining lease. And this is really important because with the mining lease in limbo, if they manage to succeed on the more important front of getting purchase orders to fill that first year of production, which is kind of needed to raise $100 million capex to build this mine, you turn around and say, well, you don't have the mining lease. So now they have the mining lease on ground where all the infrastructure is located, where the first 7 years of the definitive feasibility study mining plan is located, and where with work that they have done since then, the resource is likely much bigger there, and there's lots of resources, so they never need to mine the east pit, which is located on the land that Owen Carter still owns. So now the process is one where the balance of power has shifted. They are still negotiating with the farmer to purchase that land outright, which they would all have to do anyways. The New South Wales planning department has to still rule on whether the objection letter is valid, period. And but even if they rule that it is valid, and the farmer says, okay, yeah, no eminent domain to purchase this 7-10 years down the road, the SCY can continue with the land that it has, and it doesn't really matter. I suspect that once Owen Carter realizes that whatever leverage he had over the company is over. The company suffered a 50% market cap drop this year because we haven't heard anything new on the purchase order offtake front. We've had to sit there and just stew in our juices with frustration over this ridiculous mining lease thing for which Scandium International bore no responsibility whatsoever. So what you have today is kind of a relief rally as existing shareholders say, okay, now the only thing we need to worry about is whether George Putnam can get those purchase orders. And the company has done a couple of webcasts in which they have indicated that they are still working very closely with two very significant groups with which they did letter of intent partnerships last year. and that in the third quarter and the fourth quarter, it could lead to something. So there's also a whole audience on the sidelines which has been watching this. If you're a newcomer to this thing and haven't been suffering for the last 5-6 years as they hit one roadblock after another, then you can see a 6-month window during which these purchase orders hopefully come together. The stock starts to respond as people believe the chicken and egg problem is cracked. And the whole Scandium sector, all the other Scandium juniors have suffered during this period because they're watching this leading company run into these problems, make no apparent progress in developing the offtake market. And I have a suspicion that in the next 6 months, all of this is going to come together. The other Scandium juniors will also benefit because this market is going to be much bigger than what Scandium International can hope to supply from the Ningen project. So the stock's reacting today because that faceplant that they kicked off the year with is now behind us.
John, thank you very much for the update.
You're welcome, Jim.
I've been speaking with John Kaiser, his website kaiserresearch.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on Discovery Watch are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at HowStreet.com. Discovery Watch is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.